Well, good morning, everyone. Very grateful to be with you this morning. Hope that you're having a good day so far. So last week, we announced an event coming up this spring called New Day, and we're very excited about that. That's a gathering designed to bring our church family together with our Afghan neighbors through shared meal and conversation and activities. And this is just one more way to show the love of Jesus to these friends of ours who have come to be with us. The date we announced last week conflicts with some cultural calendar events that some of our Afghan friends would like to observe. We're still learning some things and how to be the best neighbors we can. And so the new date for New Day will be Saturday, May 14th. And we hope that all of you who are excited to serve in this way will still be able to make it. So please mark your calendars. We'll obviously be getting you more details as that approaches. We're going to do that on Saturday, May 14th. Another thing I want to say before we get into the message is this. I've been here now almost 14 years, and I've taught lots of classes. In the past couple years, I've tried to teach a lot of video classes. I have tried my best to do a lot of heartfelt preparation on deeply spiritual topics. Many of you have encouraged me and told me that you're watching, and I am very grateful for all the feedback and encouragement you've given me on these teaching videos. But I've never, ever had the kind of excited engagement as I have gotten from a 3-minute video of throwing stuff off the roof. I don't know if you've seen that from last week's email. You guys are really pumped about this. You've been submitting ideas to me. You're very excited. So some might be jaded by this, but I'm not. See, I'm learning to work in the attention economy, and engagement is important. So as you can see on the screen, I'm here to announce my new fall class, Reading the Bible Responsibly and Throwing Stuff Off the Roof. So we're going to talk about some important principles of biblical interpretation, and then when we have breaks, we'll throw stuff off the roof and watch it splatter. Does that sound fun? You ready? I'm not sure I'm joking about this yet. I'm thinking about some ways to pull this off. That was fun, wasn't it? Thanks for all your feedback on that. We did have a good time doing that. So we are in the middle of an iWitness series. That's what Phil has called it. We're in the book of Acts, and we're talking about the ways that Christians are sharing their faith and all the different opportunities available to us, all the different methods. And Phil even reminded us that the context of the book of Acts is some global calamity. Last week's sermon was called Divine Appointment, and Phil took us to Acts 8 and the story of Philip and the eunuch and how God brought two people together to have a very vital conversation. Phil reminded us to be on the lookout for those kinds of opportunities. We heard the story of Marcio and Jimmy and their divine appointment, and that was a great story for us to hear. We're going to continue this series today. And we're going to be in Acts chapter 9. We're going to read the story of Tabitha, also named Dorcas, and we're going to see how she was active in sharing her faith in some different ways. Acts chapter 9, beginning in verse 36. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once." Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. So So in Acts 9, we find ourselves with Luke's attention turned back to Peter. There's been a long section on Paul, and now for these verses, we're back on Peter. And he's in a town called Lydda to heal a paralyzed man named Aeneas. That in itself was an evangelistic act that made many people turn to the Lord. And now the action moves to Joppa. Joppa is a prosperous port city. It's about 12 miles from Lydda. You may remember Joppa as the place where Jonah sailed from to try to flee God's mission for him. And Luke tells of a woman named Tabitha. Now, Tabitha is her Aramaic name. That's what she's actually called. But Luke's readers aren't going to know that language, so he gives her Greek name, Dorcas. I must confess to you that as a teenager and maybe even into adulthood, I won't promise that I've stopped at this. It's hard not to laugh when you hear that name because I understand how English works. And so I've heard lots of sermons on Dorcas and silently chuckled. So if you need to laugh, let's get it out of our system. It's a funny name. But her name means gazelle in both languages. And here's how she's described in this text. She's described as a disciple. It's the only time that noun is used in the feminine form in the New Testament. Now, there's times when it talks about disciples, plural, and that's men and women, but she is referred to as a disciple here. That's a common word in Greek culture, not unusual to see that used. And it says she was always doing good and helping the poor. And those are highly esteemed virtues for Jews and early Christians. But what we also learn about her in this text is that she's probably a person of some means. Of course, people of any income level can help others, but we're going to learn that Dorcas is maybe in the upper levels of society, because when she gets sick and dies, she's taken upstairs. Now, there's a certain class level you have to be to have an upstairs in your house in first century culture, but she dies, but they wash her body, and they don't bury her. Custom would have dictated that she be buried maybe the same day, perhaps the day after, but the fact that they don't do that suggests that they have hope that something might happen. So they hear that Peter is nearby, about 12 miles away, and they send for him. So just think about this. There's lots of Christians who pass away during the time of the early church. But Peter gets called for this one woman, not the others. They call for her because she seems to have a place of high significance and high value in the early Christian community, especially among these widows. So Peter comes. His journey's going to take him about a day to get there. We're not sure why Peter thinks he's coming. He may think he's coming to teach and comfort. We don't know. But he arrives to a room full of widows who are crying and showing off the robes and clothing Dorcas has made for them. And the wording here suggests almost that they haven't just brought their wardrobe, like they're pointing to their clothes that they're wearing at the moment. I mean, they are devastated. And I find this scene quite moving. Here's a community of very vulnerable people who get overlooked in society. And the person who has been caring for them and providing for them has died, and they just do not know what to do. And they're showing their clothes as if to say, she did this for us. What are we going to do now? This person is dead. And so Peter goes through actually a pretty standard healing sequence. If you read some of these stories, he sends everyone out, and he prays, and he tells her to get up, and she does. A lot of the elements of this story are very parallel to the story of Jairus' daughter. And in these stories of Jesus healing, I don't know if you remember, but sometimes the biblical author will tell us what Jesus said in Aramaic. And so when he heals the little girl, he says, Talitha cum. What do you think he said to Tabitha? Tabitha cum. Same language. very similar. Tabitha, get up. So he takes her hand and he helps her up. And he calls the believers, especially the widows, and he presents the resurrected woman to them. And this act proclaimed the good news. Now, you might be thinking the sermon is about raising people from the dead as a way of evangelism, but that's not going to be available to any of us. No, we're going to be focusing on what Dorcas did while she was alive and the way she shared her faith. So we talked about some characteristics of Dorcas a minute ago. Let me tell you a few other things that we notice or don't notice about her in this text. She's not some well-known preacher. We have no record of her giving some fiery sermon in a synagogue. She's not really a defender of the faith. We don't see her making some articulate defense of the gospel anywhere. She's not even like a personal Bible study leader doing personal evangelism, leading Bible studies with others, which, by the way, all those are important ways of sharing the gospel. That's just not what she's doing. Instead, what we know is that she cared generously for the widows in Joppa, providing even basic garments that they needed, which they showed off to Peter. Dorcas stands in for all the unsung heroes who are quietly doing the best they can to serve others for the glory of God. N.T. Wright says this about these folks. He says, "These are the people who form the heart of the church. While the apostles and evangelists go about making important decisions and getting locked up and stoned or shipwrecked, preaching great sermons, writing great letters, and generally being great and good all over the place, these apparently ordinary people are not ordinary to God. And when we tell the story of the great sweep of God's purposes in history, there are at every point people like Dorcas who smile out of the page at us and remind us what it's really about." Sometimes being a witness for Jesus Christ just looks pretty ordinary. You might feel like your witness for Jesus is just pretty ordinary. You might feel like you're a nobody. I'm not one of those heroes of the faith. I can't boldly proclaim my faith in front of huge crowds. I don't have a slew of baptisms I've performed or facilitated under my belt. But you're a person who pays attention to others. You're a person who sacrificed time and effort this past year to do good deeds for others, even when you yourself were stressed and anxious. And Jesus has something to say about ordinary Christians just like you and me. I want to take us to Matthew chapter 5 and something Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 14. He says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So Jesus says, you're the light of the world, and he goes on to elaborate on that. This is y'all are the light of the world, by the way. It's you plural. It's not you and you. It's all of you. All y'all. That's the plural. So it's the nature of light to be seen. Jesus is not saying, go be the light. He's saying, you are the light. Like, that's part of your identity. So what does light do? It lights the place up. It doesn't try to hide itself. And for Jesus listeners, they would have understood the importance of light. Having light burning in your home was an important symbol. They would even keep it going at night. If you saw a first century house with no light on and it was dark outside, you might assume it was abandoned. So having the light burning was important. Isaiah talks all about this image of light. And for Isaiah, Israel was going to be a light to the Gentiles. And so now that image gets transferred to Jesus and his followers. And he says, a city on a hill can't be hidden. And when he says that, they're going to think Jerusalem. That's the city on the hill. That's where you go up to worship. All the go up language in the Bible is worshipful. But he says that people are going to see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So another thing to remember then is that good deeds lead others to worship. I want to ask you something. How many of you here, your role in coming to faith had something to do, maybe not fully, but there was at least a part where it was about someone's good deeds or kindness towards you? How many of you came to faith in Jesus in part because of someone's good deeds? It's pretty common that people come to follow Jesus because of how Jesus' followers act. Good deeds lead others to worship. And related to that, good deeds then lead others to come to know God. You know this. I'm just reminding you. For Jesus' audience, it wasn't this idea of coming to faith, it wasn't in the hands of these highly educated priests in robes who memorized volumes of laws and performed complicated sacrifices in imposing temples. No, Jesus is calling on the shepherds who owned one pair of clothing. He's calling on the fishermen who would sleep at night in mud brick houses. He was calling on the Jewish zealots who'd previously been obsessed with sticking a dagger into the back of one more Roman soldier. That's who Jesus is talking to. It's everyday people from all kinds of backgrounds. And he says, you're the light of the world. When you do these good deeds, others will see and glorify God. I really enjoyed reading a recent article in the Christian Chronicle written by our very own Eric Trigestad. The article title is Growing the Church by Doing Good. And it's a report of some presentations Eric heard at the recent Freed Hardeman lectureship. And especially there's a highlight of one of the speakers who talked about the importance of doing good deeds as evangelistic work. And I was reminded of a few ways this gets worked out in Scripture. That Cornelius knew about Jesus' good deeds. Peter, when he's talking to him, says, you know what's happened throughout the province of Judea and how Jesus went around doing good. So the good deeds of Jesus became known. Or even Ruth's kindness to Naomi. Because Boaz tells Ruth, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I love those two examples. You did this good thing, and I've heard about it. Terry Fisher, our outreach minister, reminds us all the time that different generations ask different questions about Christianity. And for the longest time, the biggest question was, is it true? And that's still an important question. But younger generations are also asking the question, is it good? Like, is it a force for good in the world? Is Christianity a net positive? Because they look around and in their minds, they're not sure. So whereas like apologetics used to be the biggest thing, where it's convincing people that this is accurate and true, it's still important. Now a case we have to make is that Christianity is a force for good in the world, and by joining forces, and by following Jesus, you actually will become a better person and be a blessing to the world. I think younger generations are really focused on, is Christianity good? I'm not saying that one question is more important than the other. I'm just reporting to you the main questions people are asking. And if a younger generation is asking, is Christianity good? Then I think we have some answers for that. And I think our good deeds play a part in that. One of the struggles we have, though, when we think about doing good for others, even in very basic ways, is we're fighting against different streams of thought throughout history. So I want to take just a minute and give you a very amateur discussion about how Jesus and the teachings of Jesus are a little bit different than Plato and the teachings of Plato. Now, some of you are going to know this a lot better than I am, and you're going to tell me afterwards some ways I could have said it better. So please do that and help me get this right. But here's what we know about Plato, who's around a few centuries before Jesus, but as you know, his thoughts and his followers' thoughts are very influential in Western culture. But for Plato, the big distinction was physical versus spiritual, body and soul. And there was sort of a line drawn between the two. And so you get different schools of thought. But what they were saying is the body is unimportant and the body doesn't matter, and the only thing that matters is the soul and spirit. So you can go a couple different ways with that. You can say, well, the body doesn't matter, so deny every pleasure to the body and just, live rationally. This is kind of the Mr. Spock thing, for those of you who get that reference. Or you can say the body doesn't matter, so do whatever you want with your body. There's no limit because it's just a body. But where this sort of comes to bear on Christianity, for instance, is this idea that when we die and go to heaven, we're in some disembodied state, like we're just floating up to heaven as a little spirit with a harp to sit on some clouds. That's not how it works, right? We know how resurrection works because we read about Jesus. And bodies are not bad. Bodies are not unimportant. But very practically, it leads to statements like this. So you'll go help somebody, or you'll go feed people, and people will say things like this. Hey, that's great. I know that you helped them physically, but did you do anything to help them spiritually? Brothers and sisters, this is not a biblical worldview. God sees and cares about whole persons. Feeding someone who is hungry is a spiritual act. It's not some second-class thing. What you do in these areas really matters. Offering a pot of soup in a line filled with hungry people is a spiritual act. A missionary physician giving life-saving medicine is doing spiritual work. A nurse who sits patiently with a sick patient, helping her communicate with her family who can't be in her hospital room, is doing spiritual work. A teacher who displays remarkable resilience in his commitment to help students learn under difficult circumstances is doing spiritual work. And over the last couple of years, many of you have done this exact kind of important spiritual work. I just looked at our church's Facebook page starting around March or April of 2020. Here's some things you've been doing. These are the spiritual, important works, the good deeds that draw others to Jesus. It looks like this. It looks like delivering an encouraging snack or meal to frontline workers and teachers. It looks like teens who deliver blessing bags to seniors. It looks like showing up in the parking lot of Mercy Hospital to show support for our exhausted healthcare workers. It looks like making encouraging art for isolated neighbors. It looks like packing food boxes and handing out lunches for kids whose school-provided meals are absolutely necessary. It looks like putting on outdoor concerts to encourage senior citizens and neighbors. It looks like giving blood, especially during a shortage. It looks like making ping pong ball guns to give a bunch of cooped-up kids something to do. It looks like mowing a neighbor's lawn. It looks like a team of Christians working to furnish apartments, provide supplies, host meals, and organize transportation and appointments for refugees who've just had to flee their home country. It looks like filling up buckets with supplies for children in Ukraine whose world is just falling apart. All of those deeds of mercies and others like them are the works of a church that light up the world like a candle held up high in a cave. This is not second-class discipleship. In a time of global calamity, your good deeds are vital acts for witnesses of Jesus Christ. Good deeds done by ordinary Christians are vital acts for witnesses of Jesus Christ. God bless you all for all the witnessing you have been doing. You may not have thought you're sharing your faith, but the Bible says that you are. In the words of Paul, we've instructed you how to live in order to please God as in fact you are living. Now we ask and urge you in the Lord Jesus to do this more and more. This kind of stuff we've seen over the past couple of years, it's a powerful testimony for Jesus Christ. You probably think it's no big deal. You probably think you're just doing this small thing. You probably think there are others who are sharing their faith in much more powerful ways than you ever have. But I'm telling you, this kind of stuff is the heartbeat of Christianity. I want to leave you with this verse from the book of James. In James chapter 4, beginning in verse 15, James gives us this teaching. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? Let me flip that phrase earlier on its head and say this. Yes, you did something to help them spiritually. You said a blessing over them. That's nice. But did you do anything to help them physically? That's James's admonition for us. So I want you to know that if you are doing these ordinary, everyday, good deeds, you may feel like it's no big deal. But you are being a light for Jesus Christ. Thank you for what you do. May you continue to do it more and more. It is an important part of being a witness. I want you to know that your leaders are here to serve you today. As we close out, if there's a need we can help you with, if today's the day you want to follow Jesus and be baptized, we want to do that for you. If today's the day that you need some prayer, please come and let us know. We're happy to serve you in any way. Please let us know while we stand and sing this next song.